And welcome back. Today it's time to talk about a brand new lens. This is the Fujifilm 16-50mm XF RLM WR lens. And this lens was launched back in May, it's a month ago, to replace basically the well-known 18-55mm F2.8-4 LM OIS. This falls under the XF line, so it's not an XC line, and that's why, in my opinion, it shouldn't be considered just a kit lens, but we're gonna find out why in a moment when we talk about the lens and what it can do, it cannot do. And this lens was launched to basically make sure that the new high megapixel cameras such as the X-T5, X-H2, but also the brand new X-T50, I am working on that review as I'm speaking right now, those cameras get a lens that can be sold in the kit with them that resolves the high megapixel sensor that those cameras use. And realistically, I would assume even the sensors that are planned to be released in the future years. So that is the reason why this lens exists today. I already discussed about this lens very briefly in a video that we will find here or here during the launch event where Fujifilm invited me to. And in this case, I received this lens from Fujifilm together with the X-T50. Again, I'm working on that as well to review and to let basically you guys know what I think about and what this lens is good for and if it's any good at all. But we're gonna find that out again in a moment. This is a proper review. This is not a first impression. I've been using this lens for a couple of weeks now for many things. Now, as always, there's chapter markers below the video. Go to the part that you want to look at the most if you're not interested in the whole review of the lens. But I would recommend you to stick around because sometimes it's good to hear even about things that you think you may not be super interested in. From a build quality standpoint, this lens is built very well. It's an XF lens. It's not gonna scream, hey, throw me out of the window, I'm gonna survive to that, but it's not what this lens is built for. But it feels like all the zoom lenses, the XF zoom lenses, the non-red badge XF zoom lenses that Fuji has launched in the past, in the recent years. So it feels very well built, but lightweight at the same time. And it's got no real visible flaws from a construction standpoint. So that's again why I don't consider that to be a kit lens. Usually kit lenses are considered plasticky, super cheap, not great performers. This is not like that, and you're gonna find out also in the image quality section, which is gonna come right next to this. The lens is super small, as you can see. This is the size of it. And it's very lightweight. This is the most important feature, not the most important feature, a very important feature of this lens. This weighs only 240 grams. For a lens that starts at f2.8 at its wide end and it's weather sealed, it's got linear motors, it's got your aperture ring, it's got your manual focus ring, which is the usual manual focus ring that we all have. It's a great design because again, it's super lightweight. And with a camera like the X-T50, but even the X-T5, you will realize that you don't feel the weight of the lens, which is very important if you want to lug it around and use it as your everyday lens. This is what this lens is built for, and it succeeds. As I mentioned, it's weather sealed. I think I mentioned it, but if I didn't, now I did. It's weather sealed. It doesn't extend. Let me remove the plasticky hood. They're all the same. Who cares? As you zoom, the lens doesn't extend. There's going to be a debate as to whether this is an internal zooming lens or not. Probably not. You can see the front element moving back and forth. Again, it doesn't matter if we're calling it internal zooming or not, the lens doesn't extend. That makes it easy to use. It doesn't suck in dust. It shouldn't suck in dust. And again, being weather sealed, it should be more than fine with your more than normal use, even with a heavy use. As I mentioned, it's got the aperture ring, it's got the switch here to go from automatic to manual on the aperture, and that's about it. You just That's just it. That's what you get when it comes to features on the barrel of the lens. The aperture goes from f2.8 at the wide end to f4.8. This is the maximum aperture. It goes to f4.8 at the telephoto end. And some may complain that the previous lens, the 18-50-55, was an f2.8 to f4, which is true, it's a valid concern, but we're going to talk about that in a section that is a comparison with the old lens. But this one has a very, very, very useful focal range, because starting at 16 instead of 18, starting at 24, it covers pretty much everything that you need in a super small, compact and lightweight factor. The lens also can focus very close, relatively close, and on top of that, it does it at the same minimum focusing distance throughout the zooming range. That means that at 50 millimeters, you can get very close to your subject in a very good magnification ratio, and it's something that increases the usability and the fun that you get out of this lens, but also the versatility of the lens. This lens, as I mentioned, is wearable, build, super lightweight, compact, whatever, all the things that I said. Fun to use, versatile, all of that. But this lens has one major goal. This lens was built and launched for one reason, and that reason is to be better than its predecessor, the 18-55. And with better, I mean covering the sharpness of the new sensors and being overall less flawed and more usable and more perfect, although there's no such thing as perfection. And that's where this lens has to succeed. If it does, this lens makes a lot of sense. If it doesn't, this lens doesn't make any sense at all. Now, let's just start from sharpness, of course, on the 40 megapixel sensor. Well, the sharpness is stunning. Even wide open in the center, it's perfectly sharp. It's very, very, very sharp, to the point where throughout the zooming range, you shoot wide open and you stop down only because you want to, because you want more depth of field, because you want your style wants that photo to be shot at the closest aperture. But other than that, you don't get much better result compared to being wide open in the center by stopping down. In the corners, which start really good at every focal length, they start really, really good. The weakest spot for the corners is 16 millimeters, but they're still really good. As you stop down, they get better. They never get as good as the center, but the center is stunning, honestly stunning. But as you stop down at f8, you get a very even image quality, and let's just say you're shooting landscape and all that at f8, you're gonna be plenty satisfied with this lens on the 40 megapixels. And this goes like at 50 millimeters, it's its best, does its best. It's really, really good from wide open, corner to corner. This lens, from a sharpness standpoint, is surprising. It's honestly surprising. Again, kit lenses are not supposed to be this good wide open. Of course, on a high megapixel sensor, diffraction may be a concern, and you see something creeping in at f16. But what is really surprising is that this lens does really, really good even at f16. Of course, when you get to f22, which is as closest you can get, the lens is there's gonna be no sharpness left. But up to f16, you get very, very, very good result. And on top of that, at f11, f16, you get very decent sun stars. Now, they're not the best in the history of sun stars, but they're very good. They're usable. You can create them with ease, and they're not bad at all. They add to your creativity because they are pleasing to look at. When it comes to the bokeh, this is not your typical portrait lens. If you're looking to get the best bokeh ever, you're gonna probably use prime lenses, or if you want a zoom lens, you're gonna use the 16-55 f2.8. But for what it is, the bokeh is decent. Nothing to write home about, but it's decent. Of course, it gets nervous when the background is kind of confusing. There's a lot of stuff in the background, but for the most part, the bokeh is decent. I mean, nothing to write home about, but good. Now, speaking of close-up capabilities, one thing that is worth being mentioned is that yes, you can get close, but in order to get a very sharp image, you need to get to f8. If you're shooting wide open at minimum focusing distance, the image is not as sharp as it is anywhere else. The lens does really good against flare, and again, kit lenses aren't supposed to be this good against flare. You don't lose much of the contrast, you don't lose much of the sharpness. Of course, there are some areas where the lens suffers, but again, all lenses do. But in general, this is performing really well. Actually, I have the lens in my hands since the beginning of the review. I don't even feel the weight. So what I was saying, does really good against flare, and it does also really good against chromatic aberrations and longitudinal chromatic aberration. You don't see much of that at all, so that means that the lens is very well designed optically. Now, distortions, of course, distortions and chromatic aberration rely a lot on the built-in lens profiles, and again, you get the distortion if you remove all of that. You get the chromatic aberration if you remove all of that. But my question to you would be, why would you do that? Why would you remove all the chromatic aberrations, all the in-camera profile, in-camera corrections, and all of that? These lenses are built to be used with the in-camera corrections. So if you're removing them, you're just doing it to complain. They were built to be used like that, and you should use them as such. In conclusion, from an optical standpoint, this lens is surprisingly good, and doing that in such a small, compact, and lightweight package, it's kind of impressive. So from an image quality standpoint, there's really nothing to complain about this lens. Where this lens is not at its best is video. Not because it's bad for video, because it can be used and it can be used with satisfaction, but it's clearly not its main focus. Why am I saying that? You don't have an image stabilization, which with modern cameras is not a problem because they are all almost all already stabilized in camera, but the image stabilizer could have helped on the lens, could have helped being used handheld with bodies such as the X-T3 that don't have the built-in stabilization. But more than that, like almost all the Fujifilm lenses to date, as you zoom in, it changes exposure. And before someone says that, no, it's not because I was using it wide open and it's a variable aperture. Thank you for saying that, but it wasn't that. Even stop down at f8 as you zoom in, or f5, I don't remember. As you zoom in or zoom out, the exposure changes to then readjust automatically when you're done with the zooming. So that means you cannot use this lens zooming during video. Of course, in pictures it's not a big deal. We all know that. And also the lens is not parfocal, and the fact that it's better than the many of other Fujifilm lenses when it comes to maintaining the focus as you zoom in. The fact that the exposure changes make that advantage basically completely useless for video purposes. The lens also shows some degree of focus breathing, which it's not dramatic, but it's also visible, so it's worth being mentioned. And the manual focus is fly by wire, and it's not the smoothest that I've used. I have also changed the setting to make it as smooth as possible, make it linear and all that. But again, it's not the smoothest that I've ever used. So when it comes to video, this lens is telling you that it's mainly a photography camera more than a video camera, because if you use it on an image that you don't change, then it's doing good. But it's not the best lens for video that you can get. That's something that is worth being said. Compared to its predecessor, because at the end of the day, we all know that this lens was built to replace it. So you want to know if with the new lens you get a better lens compared to the predecessor. Now, let's start from the physical differences, and then we're going to go talk about the image quality. From a physical standpoint, the lenses size are pretty much the same. You cannot tell the difference by looking at the lens unless you're reading which of them it is. But the new lens is 70 grams lighter than its predecessor, which of course comes at the cost of removing the stabilization and having a less wide aperture at the telephoto end. But 70 grams on a lens that weighs 240 grams like the new one make a difference. They really make a difference, because when you're using this lens with a small camera like the XT50, you can definitely tell that when you're using the old one, the weight of the camera tends to pull a little bit ahead, while with the new one, it looks like it's also built pushing the weight towards the camera mount to the point where you don't really feel the lens at all. So especially with small cameras, of course, if you're using it on an XH2, it wouldn't matter. But on a smaller camera like the XT50, XT30 and all that, you would definitely notice that the new lens is far more usable and easy to carry around, and it doesn't weigh on you. As I mentioned, you lose the stabilization and you lose 5 millimeters and half a stop at the telephoto end, but you gain a wider angle lens at the wide end, because those 2 millimeters make a lot of difference between 24 equivalent and 27 equivalent. That is a very noticeable difference, much more than the difference that you see at the telephoto ends, because those 5 millimeters you can hardly tell 50 from 55. And the huge advantage that you have with the new lens is that you can get very, very close to your subject compared to what the previous lens could do. The new lens, as I mentioned already, can shoot at the same focusing distance, minimum focusing distance throughout the zoom range, while the previous one could get closer at the wide-angle lens end, and as you zoom in, you need to back down a little bit. Anyways, there's no comparison at all. The new lens can get way closer, and you can get much better results shooting at the minimum focusing distance, and both lenses need to get to f8 to get the most out of the minimum focusing distance. So what that means is that the new lens gets you a much better result while shooting very close to your subject. But at the end of the day, what you want to know is, how does the image quality compare between the two lenses? Let's start with sharpness. Of course, on a 40 megapixel sensor, if you have a 16 megapixel sensor, you may have less noticeable result. But on a 40 megapixel sensor, the new lens blows the old one out of the water. I only need to tell you one thing when it comes to sharpness. The new lens wide open, the 16-50 wide open, is much sharper than the 18-55 stop down at f8. I don't think I need to mention anything more. And I can also mention that the new lens is better when it comes to flare resistance, it's better when it comes to chromatic aberration, it's better overall. So, image quality wise, the new lens is much, much, much better than its predecessor. And at the end of the day, this is why this new lens was designed and built and launched, and it succeeds in what it was supposed to be doing best. On top of that, the autofocus on the new lens seems to be much not necessarily quicker, quicker, but also it wobbles less. It's like it's more spot on. So you also have an advantage from an autofocus standpoint, which, again, guys, the previous lens was launched 12 years ago, so it makes sense that the new lens is better even from an autofocus standpoint, and you can definitely tell the difference. It's a visible difference that if you use them side by side, you will definitely notice. Now, yes, with the old lens, with the 18-55, you could get a shallower depth of field shooting at the telephoto end wide open, because you would have 55 millimeters at f4 compared to 50 at f4.8, so it's half a stop and a few millimeters of advantage on the 18-55. But honestly, yes, you can see it if you shoot them side by side, but if you don't, you really don't miss that half a stop at the telephoto end. And if you're concerned about high ISO, the new cameras do really good in low light. You can raise your ISO with no issues, so I would not be concerned about that specific thing, at least for me. So as you've seen in this video, this lens doesn't only do better than its predecessor, it redefines the concept of kit lens. And it does it in a super small and lightweight package, which basically make this lens the ultimate kit lens, in my opinion. And even more than just a kit lens. This lens, you can think about using this lens not just because you purchased in a kit, because that's what kit lenses usually are. You just purchase them because you don't have other money to spend to invest in the better lenses, and so you buy the kit and then you'll think about it. With this lens, you will not need to think about replacing it unless you want something different, meaning you want a constant f2.8 zoom or you want a longer zooming range and all that. But from a performance standpoint, you will not feel pressed to replace this lens anytime soon. And that tells you that this lens is going to be the new standard lens for Fuji, for all the high megapixel cameras for the next, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I would assume this lens is going to stay with us for quite a while. This lens also paired with a smaller camera like the X-T5, but more than that, even the X-T50, makes it the perfect companion for just going around with no weight and getting great result. That's why I consider this one to be the ultimate kit lens. This is really that good. And I know it sounds overly optimistic, overly enthusiastic, but it is what it is. Of course, this lens, as I said before, isn't perfect for video, and if video is your main thing, you may want to look at something different. But photos are your main thing. This lens got your back covered for a long time. Now, before wrapping this up, let me talk about the price, because I think there's a misconception about the price. This lens is launched at MSRP of $699 in the States, 829 or 849 euros in Italy. If you think about it, this is the same price the 18-55 was launched at 12 years ago. Same price 12 years ago. So for those that are complaining about the price of this lens, my answer to you is, what? It's the same price for a replacement that it's optically better, it's more lightweight, and it gets launched 12 years later at the same price. Is it cheap? No, it's not, because usually kit lenses are sold for nothing. But if Panasonic can sell a 28mm f8 manual focus lens, yes, you heard it, for $240, this lens, for comparison, it's a bargain. So yes, it's not cheap, and it's going to get a lot cheaper if you purchase as a kit lens, of course. But even at its full retail price, which realistically, it's realistic to think that it's going to go down as the lens gets sold and all of that, it still makes sense. It's that good, and I wouldn't consider the price of the lens outside of the kit to be that bad. It's actually decently good, especially considering everything is going up and up and up. If Fujifilm will ever replace the 16-55 f2.8, I don't expect it to be around the $1,000 mark. I don't think that is ever going to happen. So all in all, very good lens, very good price, super fun, and I guess I don't have much more to tell you other than subscribe to the channel, because the X-T50 review is going to come soon. And paired with this lens, it's just spectacular, let me tell you that. And that's it for today. Ciao, and I'll see you in the next one.